This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world. We begin today's show with yet another tragedy on the U.S.-Mexico border where a 16-year-old Guatemalan boy died in U.S. custody Monday after spending a week in immigration jail. Carlos Gregorio Hernandez Vasquez died at a border patrol station at Weslaco, Texas, after being diagnosed with the flu. He was not hospitalized. This marks the fifth death of a Guatemalan child apprehended by Border Patrol since December. Before last year, it had been more than a decade since a child died in the custody of U.S. immigration officials.
Carlos Hernandez was arrested near the border in the South Rio Grande Valley May 13th and taken to a processing center in McAllen, Texas, where hundreds of migrants are held in large pens and forced to sleep on mats. U.S. law typically requires minors to be sent to facilities operated by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services within 3 days of being detained. But Carlos was held in McAllen for more than double that time. On Sunday, 6 days after he was first arrested, he reportedly was diagnosed with the flu after telling Border Patrol agents he was sick. Rather than hospitalize the 16-year-old, officials prescribed him Tamiflu and transferred him to another Border Patrol station in Weslaco. He was found dead the next morning.
The teenager's death comes less than a week after two-and-a-half-year-old boy whose family was apprehended at the U.S.-Mexico border in El Paso in April died on May 14th after spending weeks in the hospital with pneumonia and a high fever. 2 weeks before that, another 16-year-old, Juan de Leon Gutierrez, died after being apprehended by Border Patrol agents near El Paso. The Guatemalan Foreign Ministry said Gutierrez died of complications from an infection in his brain's frontal lobe. The spate of migrant child deaths began in December when 7-year-old Jacqueline Calmaquin died of a bacterial infection after being in Border Patrol custody. Soon after that, an 8-year-old boy, Felipe Gomez Alonso, died of a flu infection while in Border Patrol custody on Christmas Eve.
For more on the humanitarian crisis, we're joined by two guests. Here in New York, Fernando Garcia is with us, the founding director of the Border Network for Human Rights and Advocacy group based in El Paso. And in Weslaco, Texas, we're joined by Jennifer Harbury on the telephone. She's a longtime human rights lawyer based in the Rio Grande Valley, along with the U.S.-Mexico border, and activist with the Angry Tias. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Jennifer has a long history in Guatemala as well. But let's begin with Fernando Garcia. Your response to this latest death, the death of Carlos, which follows the death of a 2.5-year-old. Which follows?
Well, thanks for having me. It's important to say that these are not circumstantial deaths. I mean, migrants are dying, children are dying because of the way that the U.S. administration, the Trump administration, is treating these refugees and asylum seekers. And it's not circumstantial because we had 5 deaths since December, but also in the whole year we had another one that happened in last May. So we have 6 children dying while in detention. The conditions that we had documented in detentions are horrific conditions. This is not the America that we know. I mean, we had children sleeping on the ground, in the dirt, with no access to water and medical attention, very limited medication and health care. I think we have a human rights crisis, not only a humanitarian crisis, a human rights crisis, because at the end of the day, the borders define the nation, the character of the nation. And what we have today, it is that children are dying because U.S. strategies.
Fernando, I wanted to read to you what the acting Customs and Border Patrol Commissioner, John Sanders, said in a statement. He said, quote, "The men and women of U.S. Customs and Border Protection are saddened by the tragic death of this young man, and our condolences are with his family. CPB is committed to the health, safety, and humane treatment of those in our custody." Your response to his statement?
You know, that is sure to be cynic. I mean, the situation on the ground doesn't reflect what they are saying in this statement. If they are shown a complete disregard of the lives and the rights of immigrants and refugees. Let's remind ourselves, many of these families, many of these children are fleeing violent conditions in the country, economic depression, looking for a better life, and what they had found, it is, in this case, children dying at the border. And again, what we had documented is gross human rights violations in these detention centers.
I wanted to bring in Jennifer Harbury. You're there in Weslaco. You've been visiting some of the migrants and the refugees as they're being held in detention. What's your take on what's happening?
Well, I see a lot of the people in Reynosa, Mexico, where they're gathering, quote unquote, waiting their turn to cross. And then I see a lot of them when their families are being released to go north. Those are the ones who are crossing with children. And they have just been released from the Yalera. Literally, they've gone to the church refuge center to get a change of clothes and stuff and arrived at the bus station. And the difference in their health conditions is extraordinary. In Reynosa, they're exhausted, they're terrorized because they could be kidnapped or have been kidnapped at any moment. In northern Mexico, there's gunfights going on. But overall, they and their children are okay. Some of them have a stomach bug, some of them have colds. A couple of them have flu here and there, but overall, they're doing all right. By the time they come out of the Yalera, where I see them at people like them at the bus station not long thereafter, right, almost all of them are really sick with extreme respiratory problems because they're kept in holding cells with the AC cranked up so high and then given no blankets, just those Mylar ones, that they just literally are freezing for days on end. All of them are seriously sick. The children with diarrhea, and also, like I say, severe respiratory problems from the cold.
And
but
Jennifer,
also they're all piled in.
Yolanda was Spanish for icebox. Where are you talking about these, as they're called, ice boxes are, and what do they look like inside?
Okay, I cannot go into the ice box. I see people just after they're released from the ice box, but the one that would be in our area is the notorious one at Ursula, just south of the city of McAllen.
So it's in the United States. It's on the U.S. side of the border.
That's right. So people come across from Reynosa where they have gathered at the shelter and conditions are really rough, but they're okay. By the time the Yalera on the U.S. side gets through with holding them for a few days, they're really sick. And I've had, like, a mom with her child just recovering from chicken pox, and she said, yeah, you know, we got it in there, and they kept us all together in the sleeping area. We're piled all in on top of each other, and they didn't take us to a clinic. Extreme diarrhea, you don't get there's basically no medical care. So by the time they come out, they're really sick, and it's almost too late. So we have cases like this tragedy of the person who got sent on from there exactly up to the Weslaco processing center and just abandoned in a room somewhere because he couldn't be held with the adults.
And Jennifer, the fact that so many of those who have died have been Guatemalan, because obviously people are coming over from Honduras and Salvador as well, yes. And the particular impact, especially to you with your long history in terms of the Guatemalan popular movement there, your reaction to that as well.
I'm not sure what the cause of that is, and I certainly do want to find out. I think part of it is the extreme lack of resources of anyone from Guatemala in making their way north. It was probably just a much rougher trip. They were exposed to the conditions and probably were much more exhausted by the time they got here. And then were tossed into these rooms or dormitories or pig pens or whichever you would like to call them, without any medical protection or care. People are sleeping on the floor, packed in. And so they all get everything from each other and more caused by the cold.
Fernando Garcia, you're nodding your head as Jennifer is down there in Weslaco talking about that area where Carlos just died. What is the legality of this? Keeping children in ice boxes, in freezing boxes, how long are they being held for?
they're supposed to be, children, specific children, they're supposed to be held only for 72 hours in these the Border Patrol or ICE detention centers. And then after that, they should be either released or transferred. But that is not necessarily happening. In the case of Carlos Gregorio, he was held by Border Patrol for 7 days. They cannot wash their hands and say that they didn't know anything that happened in those 7 days. That is ridiculous. What we are seeing is a complete lack of accountability and oversight of these institutions. I think the standards that they are acting, they are not only violating human rights, but also the U.S. Constitution. They are clearly buying into this rhetoric that immigrants are rapists, criminals, and this xenophobic sentiment. And I think that is the reason why there are this treatment that they are going through in the detention centers.
And what kind of access do civil society organizations or local governments or even members of Congress have to be able to get into these detention centers and ascertain for themselves what's happening?
Well, we don't have access. And that actually became very clear after Trump got elected. In the past, we had very good relations with local Border Patrol stations and ICE officers. After Trump was elected, we saw a number of things happening. The Tornillo case, where we had children being separated from their mothers, and we didn't have access to that. Now there are other detention centers being built. The hieleras, the ice boxes, they have at least one in every detention center, in every processing center, and sometimes they're being used to punish people. If they misbehave, they will send them to the hieleras. So we don't have access. We had requested many times to go and observe what is the situation that these children, these families are going through, and it's very limited. It seems that they are hiding something, and what they are hiding is these conditions that are leading up to all of these children dying.
Senator Lindsey Graham has introduced a bill that would deny people the right to seek asylum at the U.S.-Mexico border, forcing them instead to take their claims to U.S. consulates in their home countries, even if their lives are in danger. Graham's bill would also increase the number of days that migrant children could be detained to 100, 5 times the current limit. Fernando, your response?
No, I think this is part of a larger vision or a larger agenda that is being applied at the border. They are not only don't want more legal immigrants coming into the country, but they are strengthening the militarization of the border. We have more military, police officers, Border Patrol like never before. I think we have one of the most militarized areas. And even in those conditions, they still want to reject asylum seekers. And I think at the end of the day, they are going against American history. Let's remind ourselves that many people came from other countries because of the same conditions. Europeans came to the United States through illegal asylum because they were fleeing violence. It seems that what Trump administration is going against history and against our American values.
Fernando, I wanted to ask you about the President Trump's threats to send the refugee applicants who are in detention into sanctuary cities as a payback to the sanctuary cities for their rebellion against federal policy. I'm wondering your thoughts about that.
Yeah, it seems like that's a way to punish what they quote-unquote punished those cities that actually had welcomed immigrants, had embraced immigrants and immigration, and I think that is very horrific. And because what they are trying to do is to create this sense of crisis that doesn't exist. At the end of the day, the so-called national security crisis is not happening. What they are trying to do, and what they are trying to say is that these immigrants represent a threat to the United States, and that's why they are releasing more immigrants in Phoenix, in Arizona, or in California, San Diego, in other countries that they have not seen immigration influx, and they want to actually make a case by releasing immigrants in these so-called sanctuary cities. But I think this is not going to work. What we had seen in most of the cities, including El Paso and all along the border, is people in communities are welcoming these immigrants because this is what we are. This runs in our veins. We're a nation of immigrants at the end of the day, and I think there is no way that we can erase that.
Jennifer Harbury, you have a long history with Guatemala. You were married to a man who was a Mayan comandante, disappeared. You fought for a long time to have his whereabouts known. You learned he was tortured and murdered by U.S.-backed Guatemalan military. That was back in the 80s. How do you relate what has happened there then, and the massive number of deaths estimated at up to 300,000 people killed in Guatemala through the 80s into the 90s, with what is happening with the exodus of Guatemalans today?
I think there's a definite relationship. For one, of course, the United States worked absolutely hand in glove throughout the war with the Army on all of the genocidal campaigns and stuff. We were literally sending CIA people to joint planning sessions. But what really stands out is the fact that so many of the high-level Guatemalan intelligence leaders of that era, who were trained in the School of the Americas and who served as CIA paid informants, also had slowly but surely become involved in the drug trade, and after the war rose to the top and started their own cartels. One of my husband's killers, Julio Roberto Alpirez, is exactly such a person. The DEA has him on their corrupt officer list, but they cannot go after him because he's a former CIA contact, one of our former partners. Therefore, he's off limits. So we created these Frankensteins. We trained them. We taught them torture techniques. We funded them and we armed them. They don't much need our money anymore, and they're devouring the country using the same techniques of torture and terror that they used before. Once again, everyone's roaring north. Could we stop the true cause, which is them? We could, but we won't. We're not releasing files that would put them in jail. We still have relationships with the Army that one by one keep showing up as being extremely involved in the gangs. We keep supporting the Frankenstein family, as I'll call it. Those are what the people that are driving the hundreds of thousands of people north. No one can survive there anymore. And we wouldn't stay there with our children for 1 minute. So, yes, there's a relationship. It's the same people, and we're once again standing back and letting them do it.
So, Jennifer, what you're saying is that after the peace accords and the supposed establishment of civilian governments in several of these Central American countries, that nothing fundamentally has changed in terms of how of the conditions of the people, whether it's in Guatemala, Salvador, or Honduras?
I won't say that in Guatemala there's 300 people being killed every afternoon. Those massacres are not occurring. But, yes, are the mining companies burning villages down and driving leaders into hiding and stuff just like before? Yes, it is going on still. And there's been no true change in the structure. We've got people thrown into jail at the highest levels of the Guatemalan government, for example. And not long ago, one of the key candidates for president was arrested in Florida for trying to get the local cartel leaders to fund his campaign and also shoot his opponents. So the actual structure of the government in all these countries has turned to rubble. The army leaders that carried out the worst of the dirty wars are still in de facto power, and now they're the cartels.
I wanted to get your response, Fernando, to the Jared Kushner immigration plan. The New York developer, the son-in-law of President Trump, who's come up with an immigration plan. I wanted to talk about what happened last week. I mean, last week, the Trump administration unveiled this new plan for a so-called merit-based immigration system that would prioritize highly skilled English-speaking workers while further restricting asylum seekers and immigrants who have family living in the U.S. Many lawmakers calling Trump's immigration plan short on specifics and a non-starter. This is Washington Democratic Congressmember Pramila Jayapal responding.
It does not include any protections for Dreamers. It does not include any plan for the 11 million undocumented immigrants that are in this country that need a path to citizenship. It undermines the family immigration system that has been the cornerstone of our country's immigration policy.
So that's Washington Congressmember Pramila Jayapal. Your response, Fernando?
Well, clearly this is a political stunt. I mean, I guess the president is trying to energize his base towards the 2020 election. This plan doesn't have any future of passing. I mean, whether it might have a chance in the Senate, which I doubt it. Not even Republicans support this plan, but also Democrats actually clearly rejected these plans by the same reasons why Pramila was mentioning, which is what is not containing, doesn't contain a solution for the 11 million people, for Dreamers, for DACA recipients. I think this is not going anywhere.
Well, the New York Times reported today, quote, access to a government jet 24 hours a day, an office in the West Wing, plus guaranteed weekends off for family time, and an assurance of being made Secretary of Homeland Security by November. Those were among a list of 10 conditions that Chris Kobach, the former Kansas Secretary of State, has given to the White House if he is to become the administration's immigration czar, a job President Trump has been looking to create to coordinate immigration policy across government agencies. Your reaction, Fernando, to the possibility of Chris Kobach becoming the immigration czar of America, of the United States?
It's just one thing after the other. You know, I was listening to this story of this Salvadorian refugee that was in the plane with me coming to New York City. And she was telling me again another testimony of the conditions in detention. They don't have water. They don't have field milk for the children. They don't have medicine and medications. They don't have basic services that they need. And in those conditions, now we're willing to spend money in other stuff and not really taking care of children in detention. I think it just reflects how the priorities of this administration are set up. I mean, instead of releasing these children, we're building walls, very expensive walls, and I think this just follows the same pattern.
We want to thank you both for being with us. Fernando Garcia, founding director of the Border Network for Human Rights, based in El Paso, and Jennifer Harbury, longtime human rights lawyer based in the Rio Grande Valley along the U.S.-Mexico border, also an activist with the Angry Tias. When we come back, we look at the imprisonment of the leading Saudi feminist activist, Loujain al-Havloul. She's been jailed for more than a year for leading a movement to lift a ban on female drivers in Saudi Arabia. We'll speak with her brother and sister. Stay with us.